Awesome. And we're live. Awesome. No theme music to start out with, but it looks like we are up and going. Let me hop over to LinkedIn really quick to just share the link to the audience. And then we'll jump into things. So maybe there's a lag. Okay, I'll fool with that in a minute. Cool. So anyone who is watching, make sure to click on the link to the Riverside audience. That's the link that's going to be in the LinkedIn events page. And yeah, we'll just jump into things. So I'm excited today to have Luke Leins with ResProp Management joining me today. And Luke and I used to work together while I was at ResProp, but I'll let him introduce himself really quick. And then he and I tend to find our way into some interesting conversations. So we'll see where things lead us. So Luke, if you want to maybe do the elevator introduction.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve, for having me. Always good hanging out. Steve and I, we would either be best buddies or like sworn enemies through our. How long did you work with us? 3 years?
4 years, 3.5, 4 years. So summer of 20 to end of 23.
Nice. Yeah. So Steve and I got to spend a good amount of time working together. Had a lot of fun. Steve was instrumental to the growth we've seen in our business, which we're now at 18,000 units, which I'm sure we'll get into more down the line. But yeah, Luke Leins. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I've lived in Bradenton, Florida for about 3 years. Been with ResProp for 5. Been in the industry for about 10 in some capacity in real estate financing into development, senior living acquisitions, and then found my way to Alliance Residential for about a year before ResProp called and said they were looking to build a platform in a business, and it was too enticing to pass up, and joined 5.5 years ago, and yeah, I've been slugging it out ever since. That's all I got. Is that a good enough intro?
Yeah, no, that was. I was also I had to mute it for a second while I was posting a comment to the LinkedIn live stream with the link to chat, because I think our community chat doesn't push through on that platform. But we're live on Twitch and we're live on YouTube, so we're all the places. And I have to ask you about this first because I'm shocked I didn't know it about you. And if I don't ask it first, it might get lost in all the other stuff that we end up talking about. Treasure hunter, like you put that as one of your hobbies, is that you are that you're like digging for gold or something? Like tell me, I have to know about that. What's going on with the treasure hunter?
Yeah, so there's one main storyline, and this I'm not that interesting. This is one of the more interesting things. So in an ancillary way, I've done a lot of like rock hounding. I've found some gems, cool stuff. Been searching for aquamarines up in the mountains. Found a lot of fossils, a lot of fossilized like megalodon shark teeth. But my big treasure hunt was, this probably started in 2011 or 12. A gentleman named, I could talk about this for like 2 hours, just about this treasure hunt. I won't. Multifamily is more exciting, right? So this gentleman named Forrest Fenn, he had a very successful career as an art dealer. He was a pilot at one point, got shot down in Vietnam. Archaeologist, kind of like a modern day Indiana Jones. And in, I want to say 2006 or 8, he got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he decided he wanted his legacy to be sharing some of the treasure that he had found in his lifetime with others. And he wanted people to get off the couch and actually get out into nature. So he wrote this poem, which I won't recite to you, although it's like ingrained in my mind. The poem is actually the treasure map, and he gave some clues somewhere in the Rocky Mountains above a certain elevation. And I learned about this in 2012. I had just graduated from college. I was working, but I had free time. And I just dove headlong into this treasure hunt, and I was like, this it's in Yellowstone National Park. He wrote a few books too. It's in Yellowstone National Park. It's right here. and I took a couple trips to Yellowstone. I went to Santa Fe, where he's from, to his old art gallery, searched around New Mexico, broke onto Ralph Lauren's ranch in western Colorado. Ralph Lauren was good friends with this guy, so I thought, hey, maybe he hid the treasure on Ralph Lauren's giant, like 20,000 acre property. Um, but long story short, this law student uh, in during COVID, so 2020, 2021, ended up finding the treasure, uh, and so it like broke my heart because I thought I was going to find it. Um, Turns out, so a bunch of some guy sued them saying that he actually knew where it was, but they hid it from him, and there was all this collusion. So through court discovery, the actual location of the treasure came out. Um, and I kid you not, it was right. My original X on where I thought it was is exactly where this dude found it. So I was probably within 10 or 20 feet of this, probably probably $4 or $5 million of gold and jewels and
Wow.
artifacts.
Okay.
Just
So it was a legit actual treasure. It wasn't like a bunch of tchotchkes and things that he was super fond of.
literal buried treasure, gold, all sorts of cool stuff. So that was my big one. I've actually been. I just found this out that I was right. I solved the thing. I just didn't spend enough time in the exact location. So I'm actually looking for a new hunt. Being in Florida, there are a lot of galleons and ships that had crashed. So I'm actually looking for maybe a claim somewhere in Florida to do some diving and try to find some, silver pieces of eight and all that.
Yeah. So the shipwreck piece was kind of where my mind went originally, but I love that you're kind of a meme. Of the like stop digging right before there is about to hit pay dirt. Um,
Heartbreaking.
yeah, definitely probably heartbreaking. All right, well that's very cool, and that's awesome to hear. Like I said, learn something new about you. So we can jump into some multifamily stuff. And I know I sent you a couple of questions in advance. I'll probably bounce around with some of those. And obviously, if anyone's watching in the audience, if you want to submit a question in the chat, you're welcome to do so. We're aggregating chat from all the different sites into one place here so we can see them all. But you mentioned you were previously at Alliance, and I think one of the things with Alliance, especially when you were there, is I would have classified it as an attractor, right? Like there was, it had a lot of brand equity. Everyone kind of knew who it was. And then moving to ResProp, where they've only been an owner operator, right, for most of that time up until you got there. Building out a third-party management portfolio and also growing a portfolio when you don't have that attractor hook. ResProp, I know when I started, we had about 3,500 total units, because the owner operator, the owned stuff had been kind of sold out. Obviously now at 18,000, and the majority of that being third party, you've had to get business, I guess, more proactively, for lack of a better term. What were some of the big adjustments for you, or what were some maybe the differences that you realized? Because I think that's a hard transition for some people to make.
Yeah, and you kind of nailed it, right? Alliance, everyone knew who we were at the time. We were the fourth largest developer in the country, the fourth largest manager in the country. I think I started maybe at about 110,000 units, so already a household multifamily name, right? So when you called someone, when you got a hold of someone that said, yes, we know who you are, give us your pitch. Of course, you can come to the table. At ResProp, we showed up and the name was new, and it's not my favorite name, and there was no brand recognition. So yeah, you call someone, they say, who are you? What do you want? And it's a very intimate role, right? And you better than anyone know this, like how important this PM role in the real estate ecosystem is. So it's hard, it's a high trust, right? You coined the term, where the high risk option. So yeah, it was very challenging, and that's where my background did help, right? The first handful of deals we did, it was getting a hold of guys saying, hey, if I bring you a deal, if I underwrite the deal, if you're not already looking at it, I'm going to convince you that this is the best deal, and then if you buy it, can we manage it for you? That's how we did the first handful of deals, and it was super manual, right? It was literally offering to do guys' jobs for them in return for a contract, a shot. And we had deals where our operators didn't even know the owners like a month into. This was very long ago, before you even started, but operators had not even been introduced to the owners a month into managing the thing. Like just crazy stuff. So yeah, very manual. We definitely didn't have our footing at the time. We were still figuring things out. But yeah, it's anybody who's looking to jumpstart a new PM or get into the business in a small company. My advice is don't, because it's phenomenally hard. I don't know, man. Like, did we get lucky? You know, we've invested a ton in great people and great processes, but it's a tough business, and it's just getting tougher. So yeah, we grinded it. We made it happen, but yeah, super challenging, and that dovetails, right? That dovetails into what are we selling, right? We had a few key things as a business that we were selling that we were doing differently in the industry, but even in the competitive marketplace, like I don't know what, and I don't want to like name names, you know, like picking on people, but like I don't know what the largest PM versus the second and third and fourth largest PMs, like I don't know what the differences are in their platforms, right? It's very heavily relationship driven, very heavily personnel driven, market knowledge driven, but I don't think there's a whole lot of, and I think that's part of the problem of the industry. There's not a whole lot of differentiation with regard to the platforms. There's
Yeah.
not unique aspects of each one of these businesses that says, oh, for this deal, we want the products and services of manager A. This deal, we want the heavy products and services of this. It just doesn't exist. It's really just all the platforms are pretty darn similar, and I think
Yeah,
that's
it's gotten
opportunity.
really homogenous to the extent that it wasn't already, but it definitely feels almost more so now, where I think management at scale is a commodity very clearly. When you get down to the local, like individual team and market level, it gets a little bit different. But if you look at the bigger players, like there's not really a, you know, they have good properties, they have bad properties. You know, the one constant that I've noticed is as companies get bigger, the good ones, the gap unfortunately widens between their top performers and their bottom performers, usually with the bottom being what drops, just because it's a hard business, like you said. And then I think the other thing that kind of stood out to me was what you said was, and I guess I was there as a part of it, is we had to do a lot of things that don't scale. You know, we were playing acquisition department for a lot of people. And I think with any company, regardless of what you do, it's like if you're in prop tech, if you're, you know, starting a management company, whatever it is, in those early days, it's about being gritty and just doing the things to get business. And you can figure out all the optimization and everything after the fact down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scalability is interesting, right? So I was thinking about this week. So I will name a name because it's someone that you and I both admire. Jason Berkowitz, right? So RPM has exploded. He's done some super cool things from a business leadership standpoint. But early on, when you were over there, what did y'all have? Like 10,000 units? Like he could be involved in each deal to some degree. What happens in our business, right? Peter Byrne had a birthday yesterday. I don't know if you wished him happy birthday. Happy birthday, Pete, and Jordan, right? Who's grown into being an absolute all-star operator. But the bigger we get, the further Jordan and Pete get from each incremental deal. So I think the big gap is how do you the executive leadership that's attracting people, and with you again it was Jason and Angelique and that crew. They get further and further. So like how do you build the system, the ethos of the business, so that as you add additional layers in the bottom of this pyramid, properties scale, keep the same quality of service. And I think that's been the challenge that I don't think anyone has quite figured out. Just because
Yeah.
you know, key personalities who really understand the system and how to do it and get things done, an individual can't scale, right?
Well, that's definitely plays a big role. And you know, there's some different ways of looking at maybe flattening organizations. There's a group called Charles Gate, led by a guy named Michael DeMella, who I follow on LinkedIn, who's doing this really innovative pod structure. Luke and I are smiling because I also had a pod structure back in 2022. But that's, you know, that's an approach to introduce some specialization, but also to flatten the org and get those key decision makers who have that knowledge that you want to pass on and communicate. because the other thing that happens, I think, there's less knowledge transfer, right? When you have 2 or 3 layers, that top layer is not in the weeds enough to really mentor and coach and develop people that they might be in a smaller organization. And that's, I think, either structurally there's going to have to be some changes. I think technology can maybe help a little bit with it, but it seems to be a constant in the industry that once you crest about 25, 30,000 units, that the bureaucracy, for lack of a better term, kind of starts to get a little overwhelming. And then the other piece is, I don't think we teach people the jobs. And how can you, as a property manager, how can you claim that you intentionally hit your target when you don't know what the target was? Right? Like if you don't know the actual goals of your customer, which one thing I have to give Rex credit for is when I first started, he said 2 things that ended up being very profound for me as time went on. One was the number one thing people want from you as a management company is stability. Right? That they just don't want you to lose money or negatively impact the asset. And then the other thing was he really got my head flipped from and really understanding like who our customer is. Because I would have said at the time probably resident, and in reality it's clearly property owner. But when you don't know what their goal is, and you achieve it, how can you call it anything but luck or like a good guess?
Or just a good faith effort, right? Like you
Yeah, like you tried really hard.
Do their best, but again, and we've talked about this. I have never been in operations. I don't ever want to be. Although the best thing for me in real estate would be to go sit on site or sit next to Connor Mitchell as a regional for a couple of weeks and figure out what they do, because I have no idea. But there is no training, right? Nobody knows. You just throw them in and you do your best. And yeah, there's always a gap between the site team and the owner. And the owner, some are hyper sophisticated and give great guidance, but most aren't. And so if you have no guidance coming from ownership in some situations, not our clients are wonderful, right? But other people's clients, there's no guidance coming from ownership, and then the site team doesn't know exactly what they should be doing, right? So, and I've been talking about this, right? As we've had a lot of private equity money flowing into our business, people acquisitions. Obviously, there's a group who's going out and buying a lot of kind of mid-size shops, almost acting as a franchise model. But what we're seeing is there's this just total gap in strategy, right? So you can provide a platform, right? Everyone does that. Every company has a platform. They have accounting, they have marketing, they have operations, and then you get a little further along the scale into like people management and putting good people that have some degree of keeping the lights on and making sure that things are working right and rents are being collected and marketing is happening and leases are being signed and all that. The gap, and then you get pushed in more into strategy, which almost sits up with asset management. But I feel like most shops aren't. And again, you were a great herald of this. I don't think most shops are presenting or driving strategy. I think they're just kind of minding shop, which is kind of the job. But I think there's such a huge gap in who's dictating strategy for a property.
Well, and I think it was okay for it to be just the job when you're in a bull market, and it's really hard not to succeed. From what 2011, to 2022, we had 11, 12 years of just everything made money. Rents were consistently going up, occupancies were strong, and the gap between really good management and poor management was pretty narrow. I think the last 18 months have shown us that I don't know. I've taken to saying like the tide's gone out, and we realize that a bunch of people aren't wearing pants. Like they just don't, they just don't really know what to do when faced with challenges that don't fit within the box of how they were operating. And that if you have to assign blame somewhere, that has to be on the organizations that almost. I think almost forgot that this job gets really, really hard. Not just like normal hard, but when you have supply gluts, when you have flat rents, when you have a gain to lease sort of market, you have to get really creative. You have to go out and create your own traffic. But we got so reliant on ILSs and point system, revenue management, and like everyone kind of outsourced the decision making and the knowledge, that now when we need it, there's not a lot of people who have it, which also creates a huge opportunity for the groups that do have it and can optimize for it. And Amanda and I talked last month about the value of her getting her CPM. Maybe this is a decent segue. Like, I know you have your CCIM. My CPM was transformational in my career. I'm a big believer that education is something that we need to, as an industry, be investing a lot more in, and expecting more from people. I think a lot of people are capable of more. We just don't ask it of them. Or we ask it of them and don't give them an actual path to get there. Like, you can set a high bar. You just have to help someone build the ladder to get there, is kind of the way I think about it. So kind of two-part question is, and actually I don't think I've asked you this before from kind of a previous lives, but why did you get your CCIM? What sort of impact did that, because I know that's a pretty robust curriculum and a hard exam to earn. And then where do you see education kind of fitting in terms of the outlook on the industry, having just kind of talked about the strategy gap that we seem to have at most management companies?
Yeah, so the CCIM, that started during my Alliance days. It was driven by Clark McLaughlin, who ran the BizDev program at the time. And it was a brilliant idea, right? Because we positioned ourselves as not a sales org, but as a resource, right? A partner in making good investment decisions. It was a way of A, growing in our education, and B, legitimizing ourselves, right? So when we're talking to someone, they say, "Oh, what do you know?" It's like, "Oh, well, I have the certification. It helps that I've done acquisitions in the past," right? Things like that. So yeah, it was a way of legitimizing, so that when we're talking to someone about a deal, A, you can speak the language, right? Very complex. It's very hard for an operator to have a conversation with an owner because they are two totally different languages, right? Think terms that we take for granted, like mes debt and pref and promotes, all these things, like those aren't intuitive, and your average operator doesn't hear them, right? I've gotten calls from some of our regionals like, "What on earth does this mean?" It's like, "Oh, it's a very simple thing. It's just you've never heard this term or this phrase before." So there is this weird knowledge gap between the deal shop and the operator. I'll say this, and I think I would do well to be on site. I think the best thing for guys who are getting into doing real estate deals is find a way to spend time on site, learning the X's and O's of what's happening, because it's really easy to miss things when each item on that property is a cell in a spreadsheet, right? There's this story that I'll never forget. We were doing a budget for a senior living center in Ohio. The principal, the firm, and I were sitting there doing budgets, and we had a maintenance guy, total burdened. He was like $37,000. We're like, "Hey, we don't know that we need this guy." We literally deleted the cell. He was let go the next day, and then downstream, we found out this guy knew all of our residents. This guy was going in and like setting up, making sure food was ready for everyone. He was cleaning. He was taking out trash. He was a favorite of so many people in the office, so many residents, the clinical staff. He was like the glue for this property, and he was all in like 37 grand. But we didn't know that. We were just looking at cells in a spreadsheet, thinking we had too much maintenance on our site. So getting on site, you actually realize, hey, staffing ratios, marketing dollars, R&M dollars, right? Making sure that everything is clean on site. These matter when you're there. So I think the better education on the deal side is really getting intimately familiar with, where those dollars go on site. And I think the issue with I think it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. So with regard to training and education in the industry, I'm just going to pick on like property managers and regionals, being the two groups that I think could use investment in those areas. It's hard because it's a very transient talent base, right? PMs will jump for an extra buck. They'll jump just to jump. They'll jump because they get upset with somebody. Regionals are getting rotated through. There's always a group who's going to offer more money to a regional. So it's very hard to actually see the ROI in an investment when average tenure, better than I do, but what's the average tenure for a PM on a site? Not a year.
Yeah, I'm not I don't know what the exact number. I mean, the industry's at like a 35% turnover ratio, and then maintenance is in the 40s. Leasing agents are in the high 30s. Last kind of study I saw. Then as you get like people deeper in their career, it gets less prevalent. But I think a lot of times, and the things that I read is, people are citing stress and burnout and being overworked as what reasons they leave. And to me, those are all symptoms of not really understanding your job. So you can't get ahead of it. You get really reactive. You always feel like you're chasing your tail and putting out fires and not really, again, like driving the bus, which is, like an ism that I kind of use all the time, is you're not ahead of it. And when you get trapped in that reactive state, it's miserable. And to your point on, like ownership, well, I would say even a lot of PMs and RMs don't necessarily always think about it this way. But there is everything affects everything else at a property. Like nothing happens in a vacuum. There's, everything you do creates a ripple that affects everything else that you do. And it's really easy for like a work order that doesn't get done well, and that resident comes in upset, then distracts from the next thing not getting done. And so it's rarely one bad decision or one mistake. It's the accumulation of several or dozens of them that then pops out as this big issue. And, I'm probably being a bit naive, probably isn't the right word, but optimistic in that you could fix a lot if people just kind of understood the lay of the land a little bit better. But I think it will make an impact for some people. And, you mentioned Jason earlier. That's one thing I always give him the most credit for, was how much he invested in people on the front end and built this really core, dense talent base that then enabled them to have all the growth and be that kind of outlier. There's that, it's like a meme where it's the CEO and the CFO arguing about investing in people, and the CFO says, "What if we do and they leave?" And the CEO says, "What if we don't and they stay?" It may be a little bit of a chicken and egg, but I feel like you're giving yourself a better chance, and I think people appreciate that. When they're being invested in, because right now we're just trapped in this. I've taken to calling a lot of, like, any metric or KPI that you can achieve while still missing the owner's goals is a vanity metric. So like occupancy is a vanity metric, because it's not actually the goal, and it shouldn't be a target. It should be information that you use to adapt your kind of operating plan to get to the actual target, which is always NOI. And that's just not talked about enough. Like how often are people on site talking about NOI? Like once a month when they're doing financials?
Probably. I mean, we've as you know, we shifted our bonus structure from what you said, a bunch of vanity stuff, to very heavily NOI driven, which is correct, right? And that our incentives perfect there? No, because then there's a budget question of, do we sandbag it? Do owners get too aggressive? But for what it is, NOI is the metric, right? That is the metric that we deal with. That is the most important metric. All roads should lead to it. But no, I don't think it's talked about as frequently as occupancy. Not even close.
And I think that's to your point also with owners. If there's any owners who see this, who are watching it or see it later, helping kind of coach your operators through translating and understanding the impact on things, because there's a lot of times I can think of owners who were like, there'd be a problem, and the real issue again was cash flow or NOI, and they would say we need occupancy. It's like, well, maybe, but occupancy at all costs, like we can only sell this once, right? And then we're locked up for 12 months. So if we undersell it in a panic, that's not actually useful. Or if we cancel marketing and then we're surprised when there's no traffic, we can't just cut rates or I guess you can, but then that doesn't ultimately get you to the actual objective. And I would encourage people who own properties and are working with management to talk about your actual goals. Don't try to translate them on behalf of the management. Just tell them what you want to achieve, and that will ultimately help everyone involved.
Alex just sent me some of the lease ups in Georgetown. There's this really tight market in Georgetown. There's like 6 deals, and they're all like stones throw from one another. They're all competing, and it's got to be the worst market in the country right now from a concession standpoint. 10 weeks to 3 months free, plus a look and lease bonus of $1,500, $2,000, and you got to think, gosh, that's not that. There's no way that's real. But I think what happened is there's this disconnect between owners and site teams. It's an overreaction, like you said. It's a panic, and so everyone is over concessing each other into like how much more of a concession can you offer? 3 months, you're getting effective rents are like $1 a foot on new product up there because everyone's just chasing each other down. And they should get together and talk these different properties and stop.
Well, we can't do that because that would be collusion, Luke. But but they should have an awareness to where they shouldn't be doing that in general.
Or someone's got to be the first one, right? But like you said, it's that panic of like, gosh, everyone is panicking and over concess. There has to be another option. There has to be an alternative to just throwing concessions at every prospect.
Well, and I think that also kind of goes back to the we've been in a good market piece of things where lease ups were executed in general, and they still are for the most part with a let's see, get my focus back. Well, I'll just count on that to fix itself in a minute. But apparently the someone out there doesn't like what I'm about to say, so they're trying to shut me down. Or, I don't know. But lease ups are often being executed with the same cookie cutter kind of plan, and they start marketing late, at least late to me. There was the standard, that didn't help it either. Of course not. I'll flip it like I did before and bring it back. But there we go. That cookie cutter formula where it's prioritizing speed over everything, and with very little understanding, again, of what are the owner's goals. And in a lease up, it's not necessarily speed, because if you go too fast, and we saw this with that property in Austin that one of our clients bought out east of town that was coming out of lease up, and it was $200 a month under rented, and that cost that developer probably a couple $1 million, or several $1 million. It was 320 something units, $200 under rented. That's and the outgoing management was super proud of their 8-month lease up, but then they left the property with 60 move outs in November, and just that even if they'd stayed engaged, they would have had a miserable year too. That you do yourself no favors. And I don't know if I've sent you. There's this group, but it's primarily a marketing group that specializes in lease ups called Authentic. I follow the founder and a couple of other employees there online on LinkedIn, and they've been seeing crazy results by marketing early. Like as soon as the construction fence goes up, they're trying to get a website up. They're trying to build awareness and buzz to where I push back with him a bit that they may even be going a little bit too fast, but at least they have the option where they're like 50% leased before the delivery of the first units, or could be, because they have a year of generating interest and awareness and well-located properties. And something that occurred to me just this week with that was there's nothing that pulls eyes more than a construction site, right? Like part of you mentioned Angelique, who's one of my mentors. She used to say that balloons rent apartments, and what she really meant was anything that grabs your eye attention and that disrupts what you're used to seeing and makes you look at it will help rent apartments. And it could be a garden umbrella. It could be a whole myriad of different things. It could be a maintenance guy when he's not working very hard, and you put him in a bunny costume with a sign spinner as punishment, or whatever it may happen to be that pulls eyes. Well, construction sites do that naturally. Yet we don't put up signage. We don't have a great way to capture a true wait list, and we start 60 days out, and then have to panic and spend money on ILSs and all these other things to try and get traffic in, when we should be building a list of interested people for 9, 12 months prior to those first units, because people only move every so often as well.
Yeah, maybe like a hotel redevelopment, a couple months is fine. But yeah, the big new sexy stuff, like there's something to being a part of something new, right? And although people who are renting aren't necessarily in real estate, like jumping in, throwing a hard hat on, seeing what the property is looking like is going to progress to, feeling like they're part of the hype. Yeah, people buy into that, and
Well, and
there's not enough of it.
you have all this like baked in content too that you could use to like service the wait list. Whether that's like look at our appliance package, or we topped out, or now we're dried in, or watch the pool get poured, or you can come up with, you just like manifest content kind of out of nowhere that would keep people somewhat engaged and interested, and feel like they're on that journey with you in terms of having it be built. And I know, from groups that, you and I were talking to, one of which y'all are working with now, since I've left, that concept was something that really resonated with them. Was, we want to understand, like, we're not going to tell you rents and tell you how fast we're going to get it done. We're going to ask you, what was your underwriting? What's your plan? Like, what will make this successful to you? And then we can work backwards from there. And a lot of times that means marketing early and doing a bunch of different stuff that most people aren't executing with lease ups today.
Here's the problem, and I will say Leslie is an outlier, because she gets it, and she heard what we were saying and she agreed. However, most groups, I mean, we've lost deals because the metric that people are looking for in a lease up is how fast. And then you go and someone else says 8 months, and we say it's going to be a high value, higher NOI 14. Here's what that means to you. They're like, no, 8 sounds way better, because it's really hard. Lease up models are reasonably unsophisticated. It's hard to peg where rents are going to be 9 months from now, 12 months, 16, 18 months from now. So it's hard to put a value behind. In theory and practice, it makes sense, but to put a value behind it for that initial model is very challenging. So the same way people default, and we can talk about this, to I want the lowest fee wins, right? They also default to the shortest lease up wins. And although there might not be much behind it, whoever says I can do it quickest is 9 times out of 10 going to win. And I think, again, that's an education thing, right? The evangelists need to go out and say, hey, there's another way of doing this, and it needs to just catch on a little bit. I think fee structure has to totally change, which you and I obviously agree on. But yeah, lease ups, what people are looking for, I just think is not terribly informed. And I think we've talked about this. I think there's a lot of opportunity to educate users of PM services, ownership groups, on how to vet groups, right? The tough questions to ask, how to see through some nonsense, right? I think that's a huge gap in the business. Is they're told to want to hear one thing, but maybe there are better questions to ask, better things to look for.
Yeah, and so that as there's two places I could go with that. Maybe we'll do the fee piece first. So you mentioned the fee structure should change, and because it's very much been a race to the bottom. A lot of that's been born out of all the M&A that's happened. But I remember my first deal I signed up at Roscoe in 2013 was a 7% fee on 110 units, because we had a minimum. It was like the only way we could get there, and they paid it, and we're super happy. That whole time, most of the fees I was signing though were 4s. And again, early 2010s. Today it's 3 is feels like the ceiling a lot of times. Yes. And on new product, it's under that. We played with an idea while I was at ResProp of this variable management fee. And that was born out of a client who ultimately moved a very large portfolio to ResProp, because they were frustrated with a lot of things you've spoken about in terms of management performance. One of the big key things was, as a manager, you can just blow the budget and there's no repercussions. You just spend a bunch of money, we have to pay it, but we have a budget, you ignore it, which seems to be more common than actually adhering to the budget. Like, it's rare, I feel like, for a at a lot of companies for the manager to say, I'm going to stop buying things, or I'm going to start adjusting my spend because it's getting tight. And that was a big hot button for them. And we came up with this idea of a variable fee, which probably in hindsight could have been a little bit more pronounced. Obviously, like both sides were kind of trying to hedge a little bit because we'd never done it before. But do you think something like that might be where things head, or what could be done on the fee side that would both reward the actual really, really good operators for the quality of their management, but then also penalize those that aren't necessarily on top of things, so that we the good operators have a chance to maybe stand out and also perform better from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, we've been kicking this around still. I still haven't found the perfect, honestly, the thing that makes the most sense is to slap a dispo promote on the thing and say you're going to share in the value of this property when it's sold. Dudes aren't necessarily signing up for that, and plus, we aren't, but we're supposed to be a risk-off business, right? A lot of the reason that there's a lot of investment in management is it should be a risk-off business, cash flow business, which we do bear some shared risk, getting paid in certain things. I haven't found the right fee structure. I actually had a very cool conversation recently. Again, I won't use business names, but with Ron and Travis, who obviously we had a call. They said, "Hey, we have some very important hurdles coming up." So we just took over a deal from them in Dallas in a very challenging submarket. And what we structured was a fee for the first 6 months, because we do want to incentivize ourselves to be able to put some of our corporate overhead on the site, right? Lower fee, like how can we justify Jordan getting out there once in a while to make sure things are going well, being a part of strategy? It's too expensive. So we did a tiered fee where for that first 6 to 12 months when things are really challenging, it's a higher fee. And then as the deal stabilizes, because in a hold period, average hold period being 4 or 5 years, that first year is always the hardest, right? The most effort goes in there. So we can actually grade down our fees as our effort and investment in that deal goes down, theoretically. So we started with a high fee and tapered off. But the cool conversation was, we got on the phone and said, "Hey, listen, we have a refi coming up. This is very important to us. We want to incentivize you guys to help us." And so we did a similar bucketed model to what you had built with that client you had mentioned earlier. We said, okay, we need to be at this NOI for 3 months prior to the refi. And this is big dollars, right? We're talking millions of dollars of proceeds. We'll leave a bucket that can be shared among operator site teams and at the corporate level. I thought that was cool because that aligned us perfectly. They have a very important capital event coming up. We know exactly what they need to get to. They're willing to share some of the upside there with us. So I thought that was cool. And so it got me thinking, like, how can we build in hurdles like that? Sales hurdles, right? Refi hurdles, things like that, where we know the number, we know the target, we know how important it is, and we can share to some degree in the benefit of it. So that's been my bag lately that I've been working on, is how can we align with the big ownership events at the operations level.
Yeah, no, I love that, because that also aligns the whole team to the same objectives, which is, again, like from what you were talking about earlier, that's the actual goal, right? They have an NOI they're trying to achieve because they have this liquidity event. They need to refinance or sell the property, whatever it is. I can't. There were multiple times where I got business from a management company neglecting to plan for the fact that a loan was going to start fully amortizing. And I thought they were doing great. And then all of a sudden, the debt service, almost doubles. And what was a well-performing property is now like either in the red or really tight. And that's not something you can just fix in 3 months or 6 months. Like, it takes a year to turn all the leases and get everything re-optimized to account for that. And that just goes back to operators. Both owners need to be telling operators, and then operators need to be asking the question. That was always one of the first things I asked clients was, especially on a management change, is what's on the future horizon? Is there, a change to your loan structure? Are there things that are coming up that we need to be aware of so that we can help you get there? And those just don't feel like questions that are asked that often from at least from like the regional level, right? Your higher level people kind of have that awareness, but unless owners are offering it up, it seems to kind of slip through the fingers, for lack of a better term.
The weird thing is there's almost a resistance to it, right? Like, oh, why do you want to know about my loan? It's like, because we want to make sure that you keep your property, right? We want to make
Yeah,
sure that when it really counts, we're stepping up for you, right? But it does seem like there's almost a desire to withhold some information. Now with our partners, our great partners, like they're very forthcoming with it. Uh, maybe there's a trust component to it just takes a little bit of time to nurture that relationship, but gosh, it's so hyper mutually beneficial to have that like you said, have that conversation right away. That it's a shame when a guy calls you and says, "Hey, our loan started amortizing 2 months ago." Oh man, I wish we would have known that a year
yeah.
ago.
Wish you would given us a heads up so we could have helped you.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, that's part of me thinks the reason that it's not talked about is because sometimes owners don't even understand it. Um, right, like that's don't blame someone for keeping you out of the like not sharing something with you when it may just be that they don't understand it themselves and don't want to get caught in a situation and look foolish, or they haven't fully contextualized. Now this isn't most groups, like, but there was a big rise of people who were kind of new to the space over the last 6 or 7 years, and we definitely saw some of that with how deals were bought, and well, and then obviously the end of the boom market. We had this perfect storm of interest rates, insurance costs doubling. Municipalities weren't lowering tax rates or assessed values, um, and payroll going up, and the expense side of the property, operating P&L just getting crushed. And yet it's the greedy landlords who are affecting affordability. Um, you know, one of the other things I wanted to make sure to ask, and because I think it'd be valuable for people who might be watching this or might catch it after the fact. ResProp's experienced a ton of growth this past year. Like I think about 6,000 units just this year alone. Around there, five to six.
or I want to say 8.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's even more, nearly doubling in size. And y'all have been, and a lot of that's been management changes. And I know, like, when you and I first met, we kind of went back and forth on management change versus acquisitions for portfolio growth for the management company. And because of my background in ops, I was very much more it's actually, now that I think about it, it's like what we were both good at. Like, you were really good at the investment side, and my brain went to ops. But y'all have done a ton of management changes this year, and I think I have even more planned through the end of the year. What are you hearing from owners that's prompting them to look first, and then what's making the difference in winning some of these deals?
You actually nailed it earlier. I'm just going to steal what you had said. So for the last 13 years in this bull market, in this expansion cycle, things have been fine, and there hasn't been much of a difference. What's happening now? Like, part of me wishes I could just name names and just blow up certain management groups, but you know who I'm talking about. But there are some platforms that are just totally hyper focused, and they do have outside investment in growth. Um, and so they do and say what they need to do from a fee perspective. They invest a ton of money in their sales teams, which is a great question to ask, right? Like, how big is the sales team of an organization? We have a very small, since you and Hanrahan left, it's me and Trent and Alex, right? And we're small for the growth we have, because that's not where we want to invest our dollars, candidly. We want to invest our dollars in our platform. But you see these big bloated sales teams and these groups that are bringing on a ton of deals, and they're okay losing 20, 30, 40% due to underperformance, because that means that 60% of them stick around. But I think, again, going back to your comment, vacancies in this market were a good vacancy was 3%, and a bad vacancy was 6 or 7%. We're seeing deals that don't have any physical issues that are like 50% occupied, just totally operational misses. We have a deal we took over. The entire maintenance staff was there illegally. They were using clearly forged documents, and there just wasn't a solution with the management company to bring on anybody but. So there's a lot of groups that are just missing operations. The difference between good and bad has gotten so broad that that some of these deals are like totally unstabilized after a year or two of bad management. So that's where most of it we're seeing, and a lot of us have talked about this, but groups don't. I don't know if you coined this. You've coined a lot of phrases that we use a lot, but groups don't change management because things are going well, right?
Yeah,
Always
that's
issues. Uh, PO payment issues, a bunch of backlogged invoices, and then you get hit with $600,000 at a time that you don't have $600,000 because you're not able to forecast your spend because things are getting backlogged. The biggest one is staffing, right? Dallas in particular, the Dallas market, there's something going on where it's almost impossible to put good people on sites, which is why we've invested a ton in our retention efforts to make sure that our culture is attractive, that we're meeting the needs of our employees. And are we perfect? Absolutely not. We're able to staff our properties, and a lot of these groups are totally incapable. So I'd say the biggest thing is staffing. The second biggest thing we're seeing is just an eye off the ball with regard to just forecasting NOI. Again, I know just total dark hole with regard to what NOI is and should be. And then vacancies are creeping up. You can really let a deal get away from you if you don't totally have your eye on revenue management from the beginning.
well, and it doesn't take whether it's revenue management or how I feel about revenue management. So it kind of broke the industry because everyone forgot how to set rates. But it's also things can go bad really fast at a property. Like it does not take a lot of time. That was why one of my big things with management changes was that I learned from Angelique was like, we'll take over tomorrow. Like whatever we need to do to get there, because a lame duck manager, or if it's really that bad that it's on fire, we need to come in and fix this, that extra month of them being there can actually make it infinitely worse and put you that much more kind of behind the eight ball on the turnaround, and kind of taking that burden on yourself as the management company of saying, we'll figure out the complexities here because ultimately you're better served by us. Like we would be better, not even fully built out with our systems yet, than what you have now with this existing platform. Now, the other side of that is, we actually have a question. I don't know if this is an Adler or a different Josh, but Josh asked, discuss the transition in this industry over the last 5 to 10 years. Where do you think it's going in the next 5 to 10, good or bad?
That question sounds too intelligent to be Josh Adler. Josh Adler got to be a different Josh. Is everything spelled correctly? Because if it is,
yeah, and good punctuation. So you're right. It's not an Adler.
Maybe Ben Adler. Ben Adler can spell. Josh Adler. When I was speaking of revenue management and comps, I went and visited Josh down in Sarasota when he was PMing a deal, and the first question I asked him was like, "Who are your comps?" And he literally could not name another multifamily property. I, honest to God, don't know if he knew the name of the property he was managing. It was that bad. Like there is a huge gap with people understanding their comp sets.
Well, and how do you set rents when you've never been to the property?
How do you know market, right? How do you know where you belong?
Yeah, if you're a revenue manager and you've never toured your properties, you're just like making it up. Like you have no context to actually do your job well, and so any outcome that's positive can't be really attributed to like you being great. It has to do with you worked really hard or got lucky or the market bailed you out. Yeah. But yeah, so where do we think it's going the next 5 to 10 years, good and bad?
I think the challenge that the industry, not just operations, the multifamily specifically, so multifamily is the only like we don't talk about this enough. It's the only like B2C real estate, right? Industrial is B2B, retail B2B, commercial office is B2B, although there are generally more tenants. But multifamily is a B2C industry, right? So we're always going to have this more challenging task of dealing directly with end consumers, with individuals. But my opinion, again, not being an operator, is that multifamily operations is way too complicated. I'm not going to be the one to solve it, but when I talk to some of these regionals and some of these PMs about what they're doing, I'm like, you're doing way too much. I used to run a financial advisory firm, and it was much more simple than running a single multifamily property operationally. So I think the big challenge is, how do we make it easier? How do we streamline? How do we automate? How do we, the buzzword, centralize? some of these myriad of 1,000 tasks, right? We haven't audited our trash supplier in years, and you've got resident issues. It's just too complicated. And I think in defense of operations, I say this all the time, being an operator is the worst job on the planet. It's very challenging. It's a great education. You need to be crazy. Our most of our operators are already crazy. Jordan is still sane, but pretty soon he's going to buy a bunch of cats and lose his mind too. But it's too complicated, and it's you mentioned like always fighting fires. Like right now, it's just all you can do is triage, right? The nature of the industry. There's all these new systems coming on, all these new practices. There's a ton of pressure, particularly in a market like this. Things are too complicated. And I think the big challenge, the huge opportunity is how to make things easier, right? How do you without sacrificing performance make things easier, which I think is going to be standardization as much as anything. Every property is different, but there has to be a way to offload some of the 1,000 tasks that these regionals and PMs have to do.
Yeah, I would. I think prop tech is going to see a consolidation because the ability to build software is getting significantly easier. I mean, I'm building software that I was never a developer and learned to code in the past 12, 15 months. So if I can do it, like capable people can definitely build more. And I don't think it's smaller teams build the same products. I think it's the same size teams build more encompassing, like all-encompassing products, partly because of the data side of things, but also just to your point on the complexity, a lot of really well-intentioned people in an effort to make the job easier ultimately ended up making tasks easier, but made the job significantly more complex.
Yes.
And you're bouncing between, 5 dashboards and multiple logins, and there's site teams that have to deal with more than 10 softwares throughout the month that all do one niche, bespoke thing. And I agree. I think we need to simplify it, and not to be the person who walked uphill both ways to school in the snow. But when I was working on site and running properties, I did pretty well, and I didn't have any of this stuff. Right? Like I had Yardi Core as my CRM. I had, the industry has not evolved. Like it's interesting. Like when I was on site, there was if you saw walk-in as the source, you basically knew that the person didn't ask. Right? Like that was drive-by walk-in was kind of the catch-all for leasing people who weren't asking the question as to what the source was. Today, you don't see drive-by walk-in on any marketing reports. Right? It's all being attributed to all these other things. Whereas I think drive-by walk-in is still probably one of our main drivers at a lot of properties. And it's just misattributed. And we don't need a software for everything. And I think if we just, frankly, if we could solve maintenance, I think that fixes a lot of stuff. I think there's a lot of properties, especially older assets, that you could add a maintenance guy and pay for it in the retention gains. Of not getting way behind on maintenance and having all these angry people move out. So I think on the software side, we'd probably maybe see some, if not consolidation, like in the next 5 years, we'll probably see some big players emerge that are more like everything under the same umbrella. I hope to build one of those, but I don't think I'm unique in that. And then so maybe some of the point solutions go away. I think I mentioned before we started, Luke, I think a lot of the point solutions today are actually features. They're not really full-fledged products or companies that will eventually get eaten by some of the bigger players and platforms. But then on the management side, I think you'll still have like the really big companies, Graystar's at 1 million units, RPM at 200,000 or wherever it is. But I think you see a lot more fracturing and like the 50K and under, because a lot of that was driven by this, low margin business. We have to have scale to make any sort of money as a management company. But as technology allows you to operate more effectively without some of that scale, the value of the flat, small org that can be regional and very hyper focused on that market, those outcomes, be a bit of a specialist, and be really successful. I think we see a lot of that kind of bubble up, and or like a back office as a service provider that, one of the things that we've seen in the past couple of years is a lot of people have gotten out of management, right? The owner operator who was like, this is hard again. I don't really want to do this anymore. But there's those that are left that, the problem of, running a management company with 3,000 units or 5,000 units is, how do you pay for the right CFO? How do you have a property controller who's really good? How do you have the HR lead or marketing lead who are super capable? You can't afford them. And I think as some of these tools get built that offset that a little bit, or someone builds a back office solution that they could sell to these companies, then allows the 5 to 25,000 unit management company to really thrive, and be the differentiated operator in that market, because they have the talent pipeline, because they have the local experts, because they have the vendor relationships, and they're able to have an actual differentiated performance. That's my guess.
I don't know how anybody with fewer than, even when we were small, we did invest a lot of money. Pete put a ton of money into people, so we didn't ever have like a small field. We still had all those teams, but yeah, you're trying to make money on your own 3,000 units. It's impossible, because you're not going to have the tech, you're not going to have the people. It's a no-win scenario, and you're just going to drive yourself crazy for what, a few points of EGI. I think people are realizing that, as one effect of things getting so complicated operationally is these small shops are just like, I can't keep up with the tech. With now I have to have AIRM. What the hell is rent grata? What are all these things that I'm supposed to be aware of as options for my property that everyone else is using, but I don't know? It's too complicated. I picture it, again, this may be wishful thinking, but I don't know if it's going to be a Yardi and Trada, or if it's going to be like, you got to go Fortune $5, like something like a Zillow, but like an operating system, like an iOS built for, everything is totally integrated, everything plugs in. You've got a single dashboard. That's the only way to decomplicate things. But gosh,
Yep.
yeah, it's just a lot. And again, all these great, you nailed it, all these great systems, they don't integrate. You've got a separate login. It's 20 different things you've got to jump into every day. It's not seamless. It's not a seamless experience. And for such a large industry with so many great tech advances and ideas out there, if they're not integrated, if they're not pooled into a single source, are they really making life easier? The answer is probably not right now.
Well, and the other thing that people miss there, who are with these prop tech companies, and I was talking to someone last week that I think the biggest reason for no, even if it's not always articulated from a management company, has nothing to do with the price of the software or the perceived impact of it. It's the fact that they're going to have to update all their training docs. They're going to have to retrain an entire workforce of people. And even the smallest change, because of that ripple we talked about, like, affects everything else. It changes your reporting. It changes, like, for a supervisor, it changes how you supervise your teams, or the KPIs that you're looking at, because you have this new new thing that's giving you more data. And then we forget that we haven't taught these people how to interpret the data. So we're just bombarding them with more information and more dashboards that are become meaningless. And I think the biggest prop tech value piece that could be made is something that helps people prioritize their tasks and do the next right thing. Because you're in a distraction-rich environment and you don't know where to, you're trusting someone who hasn't been well trained to make the right next decision on what's the best value for that day. And a lot of times they revert to recency bias, and like, what's the flashing light, or the inbox email, or the yelling resident. And that's what I do, as opposed to telling that resident, hey, can you come back tomorrow at 10? And I'm going to get this thing done that's actually going to move the business forward.
Yeah, a work order, a workflow management, right? And again, you're the guy to do it. If you had $1 billion, you could build the greatest integrated PMS workflow ever, because call it the loop test, right? I don't know what I'm doing on site. Could I go jump into a property and do everything that needs to be done to keep everything moving along? Absolutely not. But could there be a dashboard, a workflow that has all of my systems, all of my tech, all baked in, and it's literally like, hey, today we're doing FCFs.
Yep.
Tomorrow we're running through our evictions. Here's how we're doing it. Here's the tech. day after, 8 to 10, we're working on marketing, like something that ones and zero easy, that you can just plug it in. It is what it is. You can customize it a little bit based on the property, and then you go, and anybody can jump in and do it. That's
Well,
I think it's reasonable, but again, the problem is the people building it have no idea how to run a property, right? That's why what you're doing is unique, because you know all the different tasks that need to be done. So yeah, I
yeah.
mean, we've seen this gap in so many prop tech companies. Some guy has a great idea, but he doesn't exactly know how to apply it, which I think there's a huge opportunity to bring operators into the conversation and say, here's what I have. How can I use this to make your life easier?
Or figuring out how to, as the tech company, well, one, hire some subject matter experts to help drive that, but also to take on more of that implementation, onboarding, setup, process, even if it is kind of bespoke to your customer. But if that costs you 15% extra as a company, but at 50x, like, you get 50% more customers because you're solving this, what I think is actually probably the keystone core issue inhibiting prop tech adoption, is this training, implementation, ripple effect. I don't want to create more, like we've all heard, oh, I can only do 2 things a year because I don't want to, because I'm going to burn out my staff if I'm implementing stuff every 3 months. All that goes into that implementation friction piece of it, and we just don't execute well there right now, because candidly we didn't have to for a long time, not just the bull market, but back in the days of like taking bank bags to the bank and paper ledgers, and it was a very unsophisticated business until the mid 90s, and it wasn't even like fully technology, whatever that word would be, where most people were using electronic property management software like eRD or RealPage until the early 2000s. Like it's an old business, but a very young business at the same time.
But here's the thing: those properties did fine.
Yeah, exactly.
This was before my time, vertically integrated time. Rex, again, being eccentric, they did this cost cutting campaign where they just stripped all of the expenses out of certain properties and just layered things in one by one, which I think is like a brilliant thing to do, because what that we're paying for, what that we're using, that we're requiring, do we really need? You're making sure people have a good, safe, clean home, and you're making sure they're paying their rent, and the building's full. And we've just hyper complicated it to the point that again, your average person just has no idea all the myriad of things that go into it.
Yeah.
Again,
So I guess
go ahead.
I was going to say, so for outlook for the next 5 to 10 years, it sounds like we're both pretty aligned on the business needs to get simpler. It will never be easy, but it can be simpler and have less complexity. And then there's going to be some sort of shift or consolidation or partnership program or something that's going to enable that on the software and tech side. And then we just need to level up our staffs. I think that's the opportunity for the management companies that are out there right now, or people who are thinking about starting one, is the big players are all suffering, and they are shedding units. Like the fact that the average change in the NMHC top 50 year over year is 6,000 units, like pretty consistently, like between 6 and 8,000 units. Like these companies they're growing a lot to stay basically the same size, because they're also losing a lot. Well, they're losing stuff from things going full cycle, but they're also losing stuff from just having. I was talking to someone, if like we'll use Greystar as an example because they're the biggest in the world, so you can always pile on Greystar. They've got a million units, and or roughly 1 million units. If 15% of their properties are doing horribly, like where it's a terrible living experience for the residents, which is not an unrealistic estimate, right? With a company that size, maybe 10%, but where people have ACs that are out that aren't getting fixed, and like it's not a good living experience. That's 150,000 apartments. That's 300,000 people. Like that's a lot of lives that are being negatively impacted. That if someone can solve, like that's where brands going to get built in multifamily. Is brands going to get built, and we just fix shit, right? Like we're not, and more than we walk your dog and we do all this other stuff. Like if we have a maintenance guarantee, like people will pay for that because almost everyone's had a bad experience. And if you can solve that, that's your differentiator. That's and the other piece of that, I guess I would say, is we don't talk enough about like the value of retention from like a dollars and cents standpoint. I think you and I have talked before about one of the things I'm super fascinated is the wrong word, but I've been kind of inspired by is Antonio Marquez with Community Partners, who has put a bunch of things in place for his residents, small portfolio. They were doing telehealth services for residents during the pandemic, but he sees like 65-70% retention rates on Class C properties consistently, and it's putting six figures into the bottom line that he wouldn't have otherwise. Like that math would work everywhere, but no one else is actually trying to solve those problems in that way. So
that's amazing. I love that. I remember you telling me about that, and I was like, how do I duplicate that, right? How do we tack those things on? We have telehealth for our employees, right? It's not that expensive. There's a million things you can do. I think the employee, the site staff problem is actually starting to heal itself. Although me included, owners are kicking and screaming. I think incomes are going up to a degree that they are in many roles and situations very livable. There is a career progression on site. I just got flagged. This dude just got flagged to me in Salt Lake. His base salary is like 160 a year before bonuses. Now, granted, his property they're doing $5,000 to $10,000 rents. That's a good life career salary. So although there's been a lot of resistance to it, I think as we see more dollars made available to us to hire staff because there's literally no other option, I think we will be able to start seeing more people stick in the industry, more training going to them, and at least that piece of it should heal itself.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, and we've got another question here on like talent pool change and attracting and retaining talent, and I'm pretty steadfast in my belief that it's not an attracting talent issue; it's a retaining talent issue. Like if we could figure out whether through simplifying the job or whatever it is, and educating people to get to, let's say we cut our turnover rate by 10%, and it's at 25 instead of 35. That by itself just changes the math on everything else that you have to do. Gives you more continuity, which then makes the people who do join able to adapt faster and get ramped up faster. Again, it's all. It's what makes it hard is that everything affects everything. And kind of like I kind of believe there's a Moneyball formula in property operations that just hasn't been discovered yet on like days to complete work orders and quality of service and number of work orders and when they occur and all that spits out the best result. But we just don't. We don't have the data. We're drowning in data. We don't have the right data. And then we also it's just. We have to make the job a little bit simpler so we can give people a better chance at winning. People quit when they don't think they can win.
For sure, and that's been the big piece, right? Property's not hitting NOI. There's so much pressure put on some of these site teams. I wouldn't take it. I've sat in on some calls just because I've heard things. Oh, they're getting unrealistic expectations. They're being scolded, berated. I'm like, there's no way. And there was an owner in this is when times were good. There was an owner in Jacksonville. Literally, when we hung up that call, we fired this owner because he was literally like reaming out our site team. So yeah, it's the expectations right now, especially, are going to be driving people away. How do you remedy that? I don't know. Property performance, there is a ceiling, right, in this market, and sometimes where things were bought and the business plan aren't going to align. But I think what's worked for us is showing the effort, right? As long as groups can see that we're doing everything we can, we're doing the right thing, right? The next right thing, we're putting in the time. That's the best that can be asked, because again, the biggest threat to an owner is a PM who promises something and then there's just no executive attention. They give you the platform and then they disappear. Attracting and retaining, again, kudos to the team. I mean, our big thing is and it's similar to the homes that we provide, right? You look at a home and you say, would I live here? And if you wouldn't, there's probably something that needs to be figured out, because you should feel safe and able to live anywhere that you operate. How could you expect others to not live there? So looking at it through that lens, and then from the lens of our site team, just like, would I be in this job? Would I do the things they have to do? Are they getting the appreciation that I feel like I would need in order to keep going? Are they being paid adequately? We started pulsing, incomes in our markets, and we would go to ownership groups and say, hey, this person's going to leave because the average income for a PM in this market is X, and they're 5, 10, 15 grand below every time they end up leaving if they don't adjust, right? So we are trying to be good stewards for our teams, make sure that they are paid fairly, that they're not, you know, being given unreasonable expectations, and they're not going to hit their bonus. And that's all you can do, right? It just comes down to being a decent person and
Well,
caring for your people.
and getting them some extra support with keeping your RM span small,
Yep.
right? Like if an RM has 10 properties, I don't know how you do that well. You've got because that job that job is all about solving problems and fixing the thing that the site team can't fix, and having that extra knowledge and that extra perspective. If you got 10 or 12 or more properties, you can't be there enough. Like it's not a job you can do from a desk. So I think RM spans would be another thing that can help with attracting and retaining talent. And again, in that you're giving people the opportunity to feel like they're winning, or that they're learning, or that they're or both. Because when you're in a property that's struggling collections, and that you're way behind on work orders, and residents are mad all the time, like no one would want to stay there. But that can be fixed, because you and I both seen opportunities. If you take a property like that and you get it turned around, one that's a lot of fun of the win, but it's also it proves it's possible, right? You just have to be consistent in how you execute, and have a game plan going in there, and not just kind of let the tail wag the dog.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned RM spans, right? That's another one. Like, again, going back to when you're having these conversations and talking fee structure, we're all clamoring over each other, similar to the concessions in Georgetown. We're all clamoring over each other to get to the lowest fee. It's like, well, we have a spoiler alert. We're not a nonprofit, right? We're a for-profit business. We have a P&L. Like, we need to make sure that we're not losing money and that we're making some money. So does Graystar. So does everyone else in the industry. And so we see the people want the world, but they want to pay bottom dollar, right? So the solution has been to increase spans as a reaction to owners wanting to pay less. So I think, again, it's just an education thing where, hey, let's not compete for a 1.5, 1.75, 2% fee. Why don't we compete on how much time executives are going to be spending at the property, RM span, things like that, right? Keep it at 3 and say, how much are you going to give me for that 3? Instead of, the part of the industry, unfortunately, we're kind of being forced to cut corners, particularly these big shops, right? So I
Yeah,
don't blame anybody, but it's like we're not a nonprofit. And I have talked to owners who I promise, some of these syndicators, I promise you, in their training, it's like, take advantage as best you can of them, you know, fight every fee. And it's like, hey, we that's why the best owners are like, you guys need to make money too. We're not greedy. We're just trying to make a buck here and there, right? Like, that's that partnership that's so necessary that is often lacking.
well, and if that like one little pass through fee is where we're making money as a management company, if like that's what's making or breaking our business, then we've got some problems. Um, we win by helping our customers win, which then leads to growth and referrals and return business, in terms of building a long sustainable piece. I know we've gone a little long, but I have one last thing I want to ask that kind of, I think, puts a pin on all of this. For management companies, what about the other side of like client selection? Angelique had a no asshole policy. Um, and we fired some customers when I was at Roscoe. We fired some customers when when I was at ResProp. Ideally, you wouldn't take those on. So like, how do what are your kind of thoughts on finding that balance of like, we need to grow, but we also need to grow the right way with the right people, because doing it with the wrong people ultimately comes back to bite you significantly more than not growing.
Yeah, and I will start by saying that I love all of our owners equally, and that we don't have any that are better than others because they're all perfect. But yeah, we've gotten to a point, Stephen. You were talking about like back in my days at Alliance where things are inbound or there's a little bit of name recognition. Like we've gotten some inbound calls lately where guys like, hey, we've heard you're doing a good job, and I'm still like I'm not used to it. I'm like you're calling me for business. It's a very strange thing. Obviously, that never happened back in the day to us. So here and there, we're getting some people calling. And I kind of alluded to it earlier. There are groups that expect unreasonable things to be done to a struggling property, and as soon as they say, but we're only willing to pay X, when I know that it's a mountain to climb, we now have the luxury of shutting those down. Actually, story in San Antonio, we had a group, really really good guys. They had a very very challenging property, 700 units. There were also a myriad of issues. um, we turned it down for that very reason. We feel like we're at a point where we don't need to take on every deal. We can be a little more selective with partnerships. Long story short, the guy's the nicest guy in the world. We turned it down. Amanda took it on. Uh,
Oh,
one of the most challenging properties you'll ever see. Like
no,
I know.
I helped with that transition. I'm very aware.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, so we said no to it, and her name came up, and she ended up doing it. I ended up calling the guy last week, I think, just because I was curious. He was so complimentary. He was like, she took care of this. He was so stoked with the way they're doing things, and I believe that led to she's now managing their mid rise, their newer mid rise in that market as well. Super cool story because she's I don't know her personally, but obviously you've spoken about her a lot. But she's in that mode where you take it and you against all odds, no excuses, get it done. Um, and it sounds like she did a great job there. So kudos, she was your guest on the last podcast, but kudos to her because that was a challenging deal. But yeah, we're at a point where we want to find good scalable partners. If it's a one-off deal, it's challenging because really we want, like, this, like, you're still friends with a lot of the guys that we work with, and I'm friends with a lot of someone who's just over having dinner with you. Um, but yeah, like we want to be friends. We want to help people grow. We're just looking for people. Yeah, the no asshole thing works, but also reasonable expectations and a give and take where we want to see them be successful. Our only ask is that they want to see us as be just as successful as them.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that ability to communicate, and that goes both ways, right? The number one thing you can do as an operator is communicate well and proactively. But for owners, owners who have trouble issues communicating, it usually always leads to issues. And then independent of like actual client, I think the other thing just to be circumspect on for people who have growing management companies and are trying to expand is market selection. There's a tendency to say, yeah, we can take that there, we can go there. But you get into some of these tertiary markets where it's hard to staff, and depending on where you are as a company, taking on a new city that you don't operate in, it introduces a lot of complexity. Going, keeping the complexity theme going a little bit, that you may or may not be well situated to take on, and then the burden of that ends up sinking ships in other places. And I just, I remember when I was at Roscoe, we were super intentional about going to a new market. It was like we're going to San Antonio. We got stable in San Antonio. Then now we're going to Houston, and it wasn't even, we got pitched stuff at other places, and it was like, not yet. Like, sorry, we're not ready to go to Denver. Like, we don't want to go to Dallas yet because it's one property that's 200 units, and the operational complexity of managing that from afar was a burden that we didn't want to take on. So I think that's something that in this need to grow and create revenue because it's a thin margin business. At the same time, it's really challenging for company leaders to balance when, what, how, and the timing piece of it, just to try and get that just right. And I think most people just kind of figured it out by stubbing their toe a bunch.
Yeah, Jason nailed that one, man. I remember him saying, he was like, so when you go to a new market, what do you do? Do you hire an RVP right away? He's like, I hired 2 RVPs. Like he goes hard, and it pays off, right? We're looking at some new markets with a new client now, and yeah, there's a big investment on the end of the PM to make sure that you got the right people in, you have the right relationships in that market. you don't just jump in and get things going. It's a big investment. So
Yeah.
I mean, we're going through that now, right? We're scaling in our 2 states where we're in Charleston still. We're looking at additional markets to get into, and yeah, it's a challenge. And as you know, you were there for our first Dallas deal and our first Houston deal. We succeeded, I think, because we went super deep into making sure we were ready on
Yep.
short timelines, right? So yeah, that's what we're dealing with now. We're excited about it, but it's a big task for sure.
Yep. Well, as always, you and I could probably talk for hours, because we usually do. But I'm keeping you a little bit long, and it's your East Coast time, so I know you've got wife and all the other stuff at home, so I won't keep you. And you just got back to the house after your little mini vacation.
That's right.
Yeah. But no, Luke, I really appreciate the time. I think I expect it to be a good conversation because it always kind of is and was, but I think I feel like we also touched on some things that maybe aren't talked about as often. That I'm pretty optimistic are going to have brought some value to people and continue to bring value to people. So thank you for making the time, and let me know next time you're in Austin, for sure, so we can catch up. And with that, I will say thank you, everyone. We'll see y'all in a month, and we'll talk to y'all later. Bye. Cool. That should be it. It's gonna upload for a few minutes.